Hey y'all, I'm Kim, host of Book Marketing Mania, and I'm so thrilled you're tuning in to learn how to build your audience and reach new readers as a podcast host and guest. I'm jumping for joy today to have my sweet friend Julie Sunne on the show. Julie is the author of Sometimes I Forget, 60 Reminders of Hope for Your Hard Days. She and I met years ago in the Compel membership of Proverbs 31 Ministries, back when I first felt the nudge to write a book. Which y'all, I'm going to do it this year if it kills me. It's been incredible to see the journey that God has taken Julie on, and as a first-time traditionally published author, I couldn't wait for her to share what's working for her to market her book, especially as an author who, in her own words, doesn't have a huge platform. You are in for a treat today, so let's get to it. Welcome, Julie. I'm so thrilled you're here.
Oh, I'm so thrilled to be here, Kim. It's just a joy. Anytime I get to talk to you is fun.
I know, right? I just love it so much. So y'all heard about Julie's new book, Sometimes I Forget. And I would love for you just to tell us a little bit about it, Julie, and who you wrote it for.
Yeah. I really wrote the book for any of us women who are experiencing a trial in our lives that we just can't see maybe an end to, or we can't see a way through it. Or even women with those daily struggles of, the mundaneness of our lives, that, little children and the hardships that just come our way every day. It's really a book that helps us focus on the hope that we have in Christ, in God. And that, that can hit us. We can doubt that kind of at any stage in our lives, whether we're dealing with some real hardships or whether we're dealing with the day-to-day things that mothers deal with and that women in general have to juggle, heavy loads that we're juggling and things like that. So it's really a book that I think will point us, will point all the readers to God and to the hope that we have there, because He is faithful and He will be with us through all of those trials that we have. The book actually came out of a time. I have a daughter with disabilities, and that's kind of how I think we have really kind of connected with having children with special needs. And my daughter will always need care, and she will always need to be living with someone. And so the real hardship for me is when I start taking my eyes off of the Lord and His sufficiency and His faithfulness and start looking at the future and what's going to happen when my husband and I can no longer care for our daughter, because she does live with us. We are her caregivers. And that is a real panic button for me. And I was going through that at one point, and I wrote a blog post about it, and that became the book, because I would just started pouring out my heart and reminding myself that I need to remember that God is sufficient, that God is faithful, and He's more than enough to handle everything that we're facing, including what will be the future for my daughter.
Yeah, that's so true. I know that Julie and I, when we met kind of in the writing world years ago, that we definitely bonded over both being special needs moms. And that's what, really drew me. I love your writing, Julie, and then to see that you had released this book and, just really getting to see God's attributes come to life, in these little short stories. It is just such a beautiful little book that makes a beautiful gift, or a gift to yourself. You can just easily put it in your purse and have it, in the car when you get a few minutes. Like I know if with busy special needs moms, or if you're, caretaking for your parents, or, other things, you always have these little blips of time that you just need some encouragement. And I love that you can just open it and go to a certain section. You can read it all the way through, or just be like, okay, I only want to read about this. I was thinking, what you just talked about, that has been such a huge struggle of mine recently was, always, right? The future. And it's been weighing heavy on my heart. And I just had opened up today to it, to, God is miraculous. And I was like, I just need to be reminded of that. But I also want to say, if you don't have anybody with special needs in your family, or maybe you know somebody in your community or in your church or whatever, this would be such a sweet book. For one, to buy for yourself, to be able to speak that truth into somebody else that just can't see it today. I love you have the little short prayers and the verses. It's such a gift to yourself, or to, you could give it away to others too. And then, being able to just have some words to speak over them, or to be able to point them to the attributes of God. So yeah, I just could
Yeah,
gush on it all
exactly.
day, Julie. I just love it so
Oh,
much.
thanks, Kim. I know so many people who we
Mm,
forget who God is. It doesn't matter how long we've walked in faith.
mhm.
It's still the circumstances of our days can really blind us to who God is and that He's
Yeah.
sufficient for all that we face. And there's lots of anecdotes and stories in there. I faced a lot of miscarriages,
Uh-huh.
and some of those stories come out. Some of what I deemed as failures as parenting that comes
Yeah.
out.
Yeah.
A couple really hard seasons with my parents, aging parents that came
Mhm.
out. So there's a lot of, I think, pretty much anybody who's breathing can kind of relate to some of what's in this
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And exactly. And that's why you call it, right? 60 reminders of hope for your hard days, because
yeah,
who isn't going through hard days? So, yeah, obviously we bond over being special needs moms. So, we also have other
absolutely.
children. Julie has a few more than I do, but we do have other children. So, yeah, we've been through some different parenting struggles. But yeah, you're right. Nobody is immune from having a hard day. And so it is such a
No.
beautiful way to be able to share God's love with them. Well,
Thank you,
let's
Kim.
switch over to, yeah, being an amazing author, Julie. I would love to hear more about your author journey. And since this is Book Marketing Mania, I would just love to hear, now that you're kind of on this side of launching the book, what is working well or not working well for you to market the book?
Sure. Sure. Well, I'll just give you kind of the 10,000 view here
Yeah.
of my journey. I started blogging at the insistence of my oldest son back in 2011, and he actually set me up with a free WordPress site
Uh
because
huh.
I did not want to do it. And he insisted
Yeah.
that I had something to share. So he actually set me up, and it started me blogging 3 times a week. And I did that for years and years. The very next year, I really felt a tug to become a book author.
Hmm.
And so I started pursuing that by going to writers' conferences and thinking that I would be the one that would propose my first manuscript and it would get snatched up because it was brilliant.
Yeah.
And, that we all kind of think that, I think, sometime at some
Uh
point,
huh.
and it wasn't. And I got a dose of reality. And I found myself several years later kind of running ahead of God and leading, trying to force doors open that the Lord was not ready to open for me yet.
Hmm.
And so I did repent of that and continued to pursue writing in whatever avenue he opened those doors, but really tried to let him do the leading in that. And miraculously, a couple years ago, he opened up the door for me to get a literary agent,
Hmm.
which I would strongly suggest if you were looking at authorship. And then from there, yeah, my book got picked up by B&H, actually one of the first publishers he proposed it to. So that was quite an exciting journey when you surrender some of those things to the Lord. He
Yeah.
does far more. That's the miraculous part right there, right? He does far more than we could imagine that he would
Yeah.
do. As far as the marketing, even though I've been on this journey for so long, and let me back up to even say I also proofread in the publishing industry. So I proofread books
Uh huh.
for even decades before I ever tried to do the writing journey. So I had a pretty good handle on the publishing industry, but I still feel very inadequate in marketing.
Uh huh.
And so I self-published in 2016. It was called Everyday Praise,
Hmm.
and it's 31 devotions to try to help us gain some more peace in our lives
Hmm.
through praise. And I self published that and I launched it with a launch team that was quite small. Um, I don't have a huge platform. I still don't have a huge platform. And so I didn't feel I did a very good job with that book specifically. And so I wanted to do things a little bit different. Now I have a publisher behind this book. So that
Uh huh.
seemed to be helping. And they did provide quite some advertising and things like that. But every publisher provides such different opportunities and tools for their authors. It's
Uh
really
huh.
varies a lot from publisher to publisher.
Yeah.
So just because you have a traditional publisher, don't think that it's going to be a lot easier because I don't think it was.
Yeah.
Maybe even more pressure is
Uh
there
huh.
because you really want to impress them. So they, want to consider another project from
Uh
you.
huh.
So what I did, probably some of the best things that I did was one of the first was I insisted that I do a podcast tour.
Hmm.
And my publisher at first was not going to help me do that.
Uh
And
huh.
I was fine with that because I had already done my homework and I had compiled a list of almost 100 podcasts that I was going to pitch to.
Uh huh.
And some I knew from all the writers conferences, some of the hosts I've known. And so I thought those wouldn't be too bad to get into.
Uh-huh.
But then they came back, saw that my desire and thought that it might be a good fit just because I had such a desire to do that. So they actually provided a podcast tour manager for me and they
Mhm.
paid for that, which was really great.
Yeah.
And you and I both know Amber Cullum and she did that
Yeah.
for me
Yeah.
and did a wonderful job. And so I've been on a lot of podcasts
Mhm.
and I love it, Kim. It is such a wonderful way of being authentic, I think,
Uh-huh.
with the listeners so that they can I think just hearing the voice of an author makes such a difference over just
Mhm.
seeing maybe words on a
Yeah.
screen. And so I think that has really, really helped. So I would strongly suggest doing something in the podcast world. And it's still a very strong growing platform. So
Uh-huh.
I did compile a launch team, but I don't think I did a good job with it. And
Uh-huh.
I'll tell you why. I was very hesitant to do the ask because I know from an author and a creator how many times we're asked for things.
Uh-huh.
And we know so many others that are doing the same thing and we want to help them. So I felt a burden for them that I didn't want to put another burden in their laps. So
Mhm.
I was somewhat hesitant to be reaching out to get a very big launch team. I did it all myself. I didn't want to
Uh-huh.
do a Facebook group because I've heard
Right.
different things about doing it through Facebook group. So I did it strictly through email,
Uh-huh.
which I think some things there worked well. I think I was able to connect with a good chunk of my launch team. But at the same time, I didn't really have a place that they could just go to. What I should have done was at least have a page on my website where they could go to get memes and things like that to share
Uh-huh.
because I would share them out but email, but it's easy to lose those emails,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
misplace them or they get buried in your inbox. And I had maybe 30
Uh-huh.
on my launch team. And I think I would have pushed for far more than that
Uh-huh.
if I would do it over again. So that was probably a miss on my part, I think. Some of the things I've done well besides the podcast tour is I did create quite a few memes and
Uh-huh.
was sharing quite regularly. And this was something else. My publisher did not want to start as early as I wanted to start.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I wasn't sure, being a first time traditionally published author, how much I could push ahead of the publisher, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was a little bit hesitant to share a lot before they were ready. They wanted to, like, 3 months ahead. I would have started even up to 6 months ahead and
Uh-huh.
started just pushing a few things out. But I just had to be careful because I didn't want to tread on the toes of my publisher.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I would say start early.
Uh-huh.
Even sharing the writing journey, I didn't do as well as I should have. I probably should have done some more lives and maybe Facebook lives or things like that, or maybe started nurturing my email list a little bit sooner, I think,
Uh-huh.
about the book. I also had attended some in-person gatherings, like there was a National Religious Broadcasters, NRB, but then there's also this one called Christian Product Expo where you can go and you can give your books away and you give signed copies to
Uh-huh.
retailers. And I did go and do that, and that was a lot of fun.
Oh, yeah.
It was really fun, and yes, it seems like crazy that you're giving away all these books because 'cause they're not
Uh-huh.
cheap. I mean, I
Yeah. Yeah.
received quite a few through my contract, but I also had to buy a lot of them as well.
Uh-huh.
And so sometimes it feels um, like maybe you're pouring out more than you should be.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I thought if I had the time, and my time's a little bit limited because being a caregiver, I can't go as much as I would like to go. And so I think some of those in-person things are very helpful. But you have to be careful with that because you have to weigh your returns with the time commitment and monetary commitment.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. So
Yeah.
true. Yeah. Those are so good. Now, I like what you were talking about with getting out there, whether it's on an audio podcast or if you're going to do videos, like just getting out there and letting people hear your voice. So when I open up the book, that's the voice I hear in my head as
Yeah.
I'm reading, and it's so fun. Like we didn't used to have that.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's so, so important. And, you talk about the launch team, and I think that kind of goes with what you're talking about. You start talking about the book earlier.
Hmm.
And I think that's so important. You're not thinking about this hard product, but you're just thinking about the why you wrote it, and what you're including in the book and kind of talking about that. And I know people worry about, oh gosh, I'm going to give it all away, right? If I talk about it too early.
Yeah.
But I think that's so important. And I want to ask you about that because I know, Julie, a lot of people when they hear book marketing, they think, okay, that's something I do after the book is out, right? I get
Yeah.
my book, then I worry about marketing. Well, I know now you've got 2 books under your belt. So I'd love to hear you share a little bit more about that because, I do think like with the publishers, they have a business, right? And they only have so much time and energy and money. And, they have these specific blocks of time. And I know when we used to do launch teams with traditional publishers, it was the same way. Like we always thought we wanted to start early, but they had their set time frame,
Yeah.
of which they could support it, which is great. But there is so much more you could be doing to kind of get that ball rolling. So talk a little bit about Julie, just, your thoughts looking back on, starting earlier, like how can we kind of motivate people to understand that book marketing really starts way earlier than when you have the book in hand?
Yeah. Well, I think it's thinking about your message. What message do you want to get out there? What is the message of your book? And we can certainly share the message before we have even the book title.
Uh-huh.
And even sharing a little bit about the writing journey. I think people really want the authenticity of it. And in fact, I've even heard with the influx and the popularity of AI now
Uh-huh.
that just putting out a meme even or a scripture verse or things like that, most people aren't even going to click on that
Uh,
or pay attention to that because AI can do that.
yeah.
They want something a little more authentic. So they want
Mhm.
something more about maybe your life and your writing journey or even asking for prayer for certain things, if you're really
Uh-huh.
struggling with an area. I had some real difficult times during the writing of the book because my parents were not doing well,
Uh-huh.
specifically my father. And because of that, it was a hardship on my mom. So I was trying to be there a lot. So it really made it difficult to be getting the writing done. And then during the edits, we actually lost my mother at
Oh,
the very end of that.
sorry.
Thank you. So I could be sharing those things.
Mm,
That's authenticity. I mean,
that's so
you don't want to share too much and
uh-huh.
overburden,
Yeah.
but just N so that they can see that you're a real person,
Mhm.
and you share the real struggles that they do. I think that's important. One big miss that I made, I didn't even think about this until I watched a teaching on press releases,
Uh-huh.
and it hit me that I totally missed the local um, people.
Oh,
I
okay.
thought I could catch them through just social media, just
Uh,
Facebook, but I've missed so many, and it always surprises me when someone comes in my local town. I do live in the country, so
uh-huh.
sometimes I think I don't really have a local community. So,
Yeah.
and I think that was part of why I missed it. But doing a press release to the paper,
Uh,
I'm surprised. There's so many people that I know that say, "Well, I didn't know you wrote a book," and I'm like,
yeah, so
I thought I was
true.
putting it out there a lot, but
Mhm.
obviously with the algorithms on social media, it's not getting out there to the people
Yes.
that would know and probably
Uh-huh.
support me.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm still thinking that I'm gonna maybe come up with a way to do a press release now,
Uh-huh.
even that far after the fact. It's still considered a fairly new book, so
Oh, yeah,
um,
totally.
to get it out there. So I think the authenticity, the starting early with just sharing like a story, like how
Mm.
did I get here? Like we're
Yeah,
sharing here,
yeah.
how did this come about?
Uh-huh.
What's the backstory of the message? My blog post, just sharing that and even adding to it and
Uh-huh.
saying this is the catalyst to the book. Uh,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then maybe even tapping it and asking them questions about
Uh-huh.
what you've tapped into as the felt need around that message.
Mhm.
So kind of engaging them and pulling them in. So often I would feel overwhelmed about it that I
Uh-huh.
wouldn't do anything. Well, something is better
Yeah.
than nothing.
Yeah.
And so I would start 6 months ahead of time and just slowly just share some of the story behind it, share some of the message
Mhm.
behind it, share some of your prayer requests, some of the things where you're struggling with it. Um, there's real struggles no matter how many books you have under your belt. I
Yeah.
was just at a retreat actually
Uh-huh.
where there's a very, very well-known author and speaker. And on a panel, she actually shared how she compares herself to others. Like she feels like she doesn't measure up to some of these others. And
Uh-huh.
you could have heard a pin drop and everybody's jaw dropped. I mean, it was just to hear her admit that
Yeah.
when we thought as less experienced authors and writers and speakers, we thought we were the ones,
Uh-huh.
that are the only
Yeah.
ones that face that. But people want that.
Uh,
It helps validate our feelings. And so if we can reach out to audience earlier, and that's not sharing stuff that's going to hurt the publisher. That's not
right.
sharing anything ahead of your publisher. That's just being authentic
Yeah.
and talking about the things that are right there in your life.
Yeah, that's so
Um,
true, and I love that you said, like, AI can't do that, right? AI
No.
cannot share your struggles.
Right.
And everything you talked about, like that's so appropriate to like what we just talked about with your book. Just, you know, those are situations like, with your parents and different situations where you're hurting and you need that hope. But
Mhm.
it's like that reality, like it's really of that visual and that storytelling that, yeah, AI can't do for us. And
Right.
it's not, hey, in my book, I talk about this. It's like, no, let me just share my life with you. And
Yeah.
like you say, you're not oversharing, but you're just sharing things that we can relate to so much.
Yeah.
And if we're not going through it, we probably know somebody that is. And so, yeah, like you just said, just getting to know Julie as an author, like
Mhm.
it is
Mhm.
so funny to think like somebody would not know you wrote a book, like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
crazy, crazy, crazy. So let me ask you, because we did talk about guesting on podcasts, Julie, and you have been on a bunch of them for sure, which
Yes.
kudos to you and kudos to Amber and your publisher for making that happen. So tell us how the podcast tour has helped you market your book or just, grow your email list or just you building relationships and just serving your target readers.
Yeah, I think probably one of the biggest things is the relationships and the new communities
Hmm.
that I've been exposed to through that. And that doesn't have to stop and isn't going to stop because I continue to add to my list now that Amber's contract's done.
Uh-huh.
She's done her part, but that
Yeah.
doesn't mean I need to stop doing that. And I
Yeah.
found that I really love that expression.
Uh-huh.
Whether I'm going to start a podcast or whether I'm going
Uh-huh.
to just continue to guest, it doesn't have to quit because
Yeah.
so one thing it does is it helps you hone your message
Hmm.
and being able to speak that out and also to find out if this is a media that you can relate to that
Hmm.
works well with your gifting. And we all have different media that works better and different,
Yeah.
in different depending on your personality and stuff like that. So that can really help that. But then just exposure. I mean, there is so many different communities. I knew these people, these hosts, but I didn't know that there's a lot of the people was not connected to.
Uh-huh.
And I've heard so many people coming back on that and saying, I listened to your podcast episode on whatever,
Uh-huh.
and it
Yeah.
was just, it really resonated with me. Um, and now they're my follower, where they
Uh-huh.
weren't before.
Yeah.
So yes, it did generate leads. Now I have a hard time knowing how many direct book sales that led
Uh-huh.
to. And I'm not
Right.
sure how you can measure that, but
Uh-huh.
it definitely opened up new audiences to me and it definitely brought in some new subscribers to me. And I think the more you can talk about your message, I don't know that you can actually put a quantitative value on that. I mean, it's just
Uh-huh.
huge.
Yeah.
And the whole voice thing goes back to the authenticity. So I think podcasting it's a no-brainer. I think everybody needs to be doing it.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. And it is sometimes a little frustrating because you can't see the exact, okay, I've been
You
on
can't.
this many
Right.
podcasts and I got this many book sales,
Mhm.
especially with a traditional publisher that you don't get to see that. You don't really get to see the results on Amazon every day. But it is just a cumulative effect, right? If
It
you
is.
look back on a quarter or the whole year and you go,
Mhm.
okay, what have I done? Well, I've done all these things and I've seen results. And that's the main thing I've been doing. So it's kind of easy to figure out. Um, but I know it's hard to measure the
Right.
relationships too. Like you talk about
It
getting in
is.
front of new communities. And that's what we're always trying to do is how can we get in front of new readers that need this God given message? And there's just all these little pockets of people that, I mean, it just blows me away when you
Absolutely.
meet somebody and you're just like, wow, how did I not know about you? I feel like I'm
Absolutely.
connected and we
Yeah, and
forget how
I've been
big bad
out
the
there.
world is.
I've been out there. I've been to a lot of writers conferences
Yeah,
and a
you
couple of
have.
these retreats and things that I've been to.
Uh-huh.
Now I can say I know these people, these hosts. The retreat I was just at had a whole bunch of hosts. I'd never met them in person.
Yeah.
And now I can say I know them and I've reached their audience and that relationship is priceless.
That's so
Because
true.
whether it's for this book or whatever
Yeah.
message I come up with next, it's going to serve
Uh-huh.
well into the future. I look at it sort of like I have this love-hate relationship with Pinterest. I love
Uh-huh.
Pinterest,
Yeah.
and I think it's a very strong marketing tool as well.
Uh-huh.
And I've tried to utilize that more. But Pinterest is not a quick turnaround.
Yeah.
But you got to put this stuff out there, and then you got to let it kind of marinate a little bit
Uh-huh.
and build, and then people start finding it, and then more people start finding it. And I think podcasts are like that. They live
Mhm.
on; they're evergreen.
Yeah, yeah.
So, so it's going to help my book sales and it's going to help my message out there and my name recognition for
Uh-huh.
years to come.
Yeah.
And I can't put a price on that.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. And it is so nice to think when you put that relationship first, then when you have your next book, it's so much easier to
Hmm.
collaborate again versus
Hmm.
like if you're just like, it's just a one and done, I'm on the interview, I'm done with the interview, close that door, then it's so exhausting when the next book
Yeah.
comes and you're trying to build all that again. So that's so good. So one more question I wanted to ask you, Julie. You talked about you not having a huge platform, and I'm not going to talk about
Yeah.
numbers, but that's what you think, right? You think you don't have a huge platform, but yet you have got a published book with a
Yeah.
huge traditional publisher. So how did that happen? Because I know everybody's wondering about that, right? Well, so we all hear you have to have these huge platforms,
Yeah.
but yet,
Yeah.
maybe you don't.
Well, the good Christian answer would be
Uh-huh.
God, because
Yeah.
it definitely was. I mean, he definitely opened doors that probably on paper
Yeah.
should not have been open for me. Let's put
Yeah.
it that way. But that's something that I'm actually really excited to start sharing some of this
Hmm.
in some writing workshops, because we're told the way it should be done. I mean, if we've
Uh-huh.
done our due diligence, we know the proper route, so to speak, to get a traditional publisher.
Uh-huh.
You build the numbers, you get the email subscribers, you get social media numbers, and you continue to build and you continue to get your name out there. And then when you have this huge platform, the doors are going to open. And
Hmm.
along with your wonderful writing, of course, you continue to
Yeah.
write so you can get better at that. But you know what? If God has a message that he wants to get out there, he's going to get it out there, whether you have those numbers or not. And
Uh-huh.
I'm not the exception here. I mean, I am an exception to some of what we hear, that you have to have this big platform, because I really don't have those numbers.
Uh-huh.
But like you said, I have this huge publisher, and it was partly because of my agent that I was able to get there. And to get an agent also often requires a pretty good platform.
Yeah.
And my agent told me that he picked me up, because I endured, I
Uh-huh.
persevered. Like, I started this in 2011,
Yeah.
and I haven't stopped knocking on the doors and
Mhm.
going to the writers' conferences and spending the money to become a better writer, to understand um, the publishing industry better. And
Mhm.
that was one of the big things that my publisher said. First, he said, I believe that you have a lot to share with people because of my life experiences. And I think we all have stuff we can share and encourage others with. It's trying to find that and where
Uh-huh.
that niche is. Um, Number two was, I knew the publishing industry through both my proofreading and through going to all these conferences and continuing to knock on the door. So I was an easy client for him.
Uh-huh.
He knew he didn't have to walk me through. He knew he
Yeah.
didn't have to take my hand through every little step. And that's huge for an agent, because
Uh-huh.
they have a lot of different clients, and they want the client to succeed, because that means money in their pocket as
Uh-huh.
well. That means
Yeah.
they succeed. So if he can have an easy win, then that's a no-brainer client.
Mhm.
Now you still have to take that next step and have a worthy idea and some good writing. So
Mhm.
for sure, practice your writing
Yeah.
and ask God to help you with those ideas. I pitched a lot of things before this
Uh-huh.
one got picked up, so it certainly isn't an overnight thing.
Yeah.
But don't give up. It's been 13 years now. It came out in May, so 13 years for me to get a traditionally published contract, or 12 and a half anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
isn't an overnight success by any
Yeah.
means. So, yeah, so be an easy client.
Yeah.
Know
That's
your
great.
stuff,
That's great. Yeah,
and
and
and,
I think
and
that's so
continue to
important to
practice.
remember. Yeah, it's not overnight, and you've been
No,
at it quite a few years and bring a lot to the table that people don't always think about. So,
right, right.
yeah, I think that's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that, Julie. I did want to be sure and ask you about that. Well, this has been so, so good. And I will definitely put a link to Julie's book in the show notes and let you know how to get a hold of her. And Julie, I just so appreciate your time today. It's been amazing.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. This was so fun. And, just keep plugging away. Don't give
Mhm.
up. If you have a message that God has put on your heart, to share it. And maybe it's not even supposed to be a book, but
Mhm.
hey,
Yeah.
there's people out there that need to hear it. So
Mhm.
don't give up, and see what doors the Lord opens. He'll
Yeah,
get it
that's
out there.
such great advice. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Kim.
Oh, y'all, isn't Julie incredible? I love what she shared about how God will help get your message out there no matter what, even if it's not the path you thought or in the timeline you thought. Keep persevering. I know my heart's not the only one that needed to hear that today. Thanks for tuning in, y'all. It means the world to me. And as always, I'll be there for you next episode to help you build your audience and reach new readers one podcast at a time. See you then.